Hi everybody, Adrian Plass here.
Yes, and Bridget. Hello.
And what number are we on?
I think it's 169, isn't
Yeah,
it?
it is.
And our wonderful
Statistician.
he may not be a statistician, but he's always got something interesting to say.
What does he say about
us.
169?
He says minuscule 169 is an 11th century Greek minuscule manuscript
Well, we knew
on
that,
parchment, and it contains the complete text of the four Gospels.
Right. I think we better hear that again. Minuscule 169 is an 11th century Greek minuscule manuscript on parchment. Actually, it's remarkable, isn't it?
It is.
11th century,
Yeah.
and it contains the complete text of the four Gospels.
Yes.
Well, that's a pretty dramatic one.
I
mean,
think
that
so
was quite
too.
good.
I
Yeah.
think so too. Like people who carve on a grain of rice and
That's
things
right,
like
yeah,
that just defy all possible logical belief, really. But
Yeah.
they do.
They
and
do,
So
yeah.
obviously this 11th century Greek person managed to put the complete text of the four Gospels onto tiny
I
little...
like to think of him arriving in a sort of crazed state at the end and asking someone to check and them saying, no, I'm not checking that.
You've
Anyway,
left out a line.
Left a line out, yeah. So what has struck you this week? There's a couple of things, aren't there?
Oh, gosh. Well, I mean, apart from the ongoing confusion in our minds about this nurse, and we've had one or two emails about that maybe we'll come back to another time, but interestingly, it was a radio program I heard in the car. I always seem to hear the radio when I'm in the car and come back to you with all sorts of half-remembered things. But this was fascinating. It was an architect in an interview, and he's a very well-known architect whose name I haven't got in front of me. But he was talking about how buildings always reflected human beings, because if you think about old buildings, they're very funny shapes very often, aren't they? Because they started as one thing and then maybe the family grew or something happened.
Remember in Bath, the curves of houses where the rich people built back quite a long way and the poorer ones only had a front.
They had a facade.
Yeah,
They did. And I was thinking about a village we lived in Hyington, where I reckon sometimes in Yorkshire and in the north they do it to keep the cold out, because they just join houses onto each other, don't they? So you get a really tiny little cottage next to a huge house, but it's all real. And it's all organic, I suppose. It's evolved. And this architect was talking about how once the technology developed to a point that you could erect high-rise, you could decide how to make things economically sound and use materials that made sense at the time, that there was a time in architecture where people were forgotten. And do you remember Billy Connolly, when we heard that interview with him, and he was talking about moving out of the Gorbals and moving into this new purpose-built blocks in which they had running water and indoor toilets, and in theory that meant everything was okay, but there were no open spaces, no places for children, no community areas, and everybody kind of died.
Yeah.
And I was fascinated, I suppose, by this architect talking about the need to think about the fact that human beings have emotions.
Yeah.
They have a heart as well as a head. Yeah.
And did he think there was a scope or possibility of actually being able to do that? Because life has changed so much, hasn't it?
I think he's realising there is a need as people are losing connection with each other and loneliness is on the increase. I think he's realising, and there were people on this programme who are working within the community in Bristol, trying to bring back some life into a very dead area of buildings. And he was saying that when architecture became so important that it sort of separated itself from human beings, if you like. And other people would say, but don't you think? And his feeling would be, or the architect's feeling might be, well, you don't really know what you're talking about. I that struck a lot of things in me, really.
Well, and when you tell me about that, it's like a sort of parable, because having reached this age, and I think for both of us, there's a sometimes the moment where you're looking at yourself and your life and what you appear to have evolved as and how you've changed and you think, well, how did I allow that to happen like that? You know,
I think you're going to have to tell me.
Well,
what
you
you're
collect prejudices and ways of looking at things, and I mean, I've already mentioned many times. It's a tiny thing, my tattoo. Well, so.
That hasn't shocked anybody at all.
But the important thing is that for years it was almost as though it was an inbuilt sin. You know the old joke about sex before marriage is bad because it might lead to dancing. There's a feeling.
What would the tattoo lead to? Wildness and.
There's a verse in the Old Testament about drawing on your skin, and I never knew about that actually, but there was sort of unwritten thing about that. But I mean, and I wonder the areas in which, like the architect is saying, it's possible to go back to being a person who has reviewed some of what you've accepted and
looked at the disconnect between what your heart says or your common sense says. Allowing a disconnect to happen because people are telling you that they are the experts, that they know. Is that what you're saying?
Sort of
really?
like that. It's something we have talked about in the past, and we do meet a lot of people like this, who have moved to a position where the emotion, and there was a time when I know we were taught when I was young anyway that emotion is as a distraction to be avoided, which is not good news for you, is it? It's not really good news for me, but because we're both.
Would you like to expand on that,
well,
Mr. Plass?
You're openly emotional. I am very emotional, but I tuck it away inside me somewhere. But the thing is that old thing people used to say, you know, he's got it in his head, but it hasn't descended to his heart. But we meet a lot of people who have it in their hearts, their belief. It's not an emotional thing exactly, but it's of the heart. Something that you want, you remember, you feel, you reach for, but you don't have the stuff in your head anymore to cope with what that means, because something tells you that that the head is lost for words. Because the thing that is real in your heart, that is really important, doesn't seem to be quite dealt with by the words you've been taught to use to describe it. And it's a different problem. The head to heart is one thing, but if it's in your heart, say someone, but it could be any faith, but suppose they became a Christian years ago and it really meant something. And gradually they've been not able to cope with the way it's expressed normally, and yet it's still there. And I've seen people with their eyes battling somehow to say, I want it, I want it back, but I don't know how to talk about it, and I don't even really quite know what it is.
But surely that's, I mean, when you think of the poetry over all the centuries trying to talk about love and how hard it is to I mean, the Romantics talked about it in a certain way, other people have talked, but actually it is an extraordinarily difficult thing to actually find the words to say, which is why it's, we come down to I love you or something very, very simple, because the whole thing is too big. And maybe, I mean, our problem, and you and I both have a problem with sometimes people do think they can put it into words. They do think they can put the whole of God into words, the whole of what we believe into simple words. And actually, really, 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 we can't.
I don't think you can even begin. All you can do...
And you're a writer, and you do try and put things into words.
I have a go, but all you can do is to say what's happened to you.
Yeah.
And sometimes try to express it, and you can have a problem because it doesn't seem to fit. I was thinking about us too. I mean, I think over the years, I mean, this is all sort of different, but we've led a slightly odd life in a way. Because
that's because we're odd people.
I know, but we've travelled a lot, and we've gone and done stuff, and been to churches and all over the world, and done all sorts of stuff. And now I think there's a part of us that wants to go back to being us, and to enjoy the things that are a very important part of who we are, and they're very simple things.
I don't want to disagree with you, but I don't really think we did ever get so caught up in otherness that we didn't enjoy the very, very simple things. I don't know quite what you mean, really.
Well, I hope you're right. I notice, though, that we're finding our time filled up with things. And every now and then we're saying, what are we doing? What are we doing? Why are we not making space for us? And so I do think there is an issue, and whether it's about going back or not, I don't know. But
I know you're battling actually in your head with all sorts of things at the moment, aren't you? I think mainly, and I think some of that is to do with having to be more static than maybe you were. The distractions are maybe not there in quite the same way. I mean, you've been thinking about an awful lot of big issues in your mind, haven't you?
Well, I do. I mean, I suppose that is true, but I do have a freedom now that I never had before, really, about God. I do believe now that I am allowed to be who I am. And I was saying to someone just this morning that one of the people talk about sin an awful lot, and one of the things that perhaps has got lost is, to use an old-fashioned word, that we are redeemed. We are not. Someone said to me years ago, but specifically to me, said, God isn't interested in what how you said, interested in what you're going to become. And that process of becoming is a long, slow one. But I think it's good to try to deal bravely with some of these things that are a bit confusing or tricky to deal with, and they're not even easy to express, actually.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking about something I'm sure you've said before, and you certainly said it to me, that when you were young, you believed in God while you were in church, and then once you got home, it had sort of disappeared, and you wondered where this God had gone, or he'd disappeared. And I think now, I mean, you enjoy going to church to be with people, but that's not, you're not feeling that God is only going to be there. In fact, you've said that you feel closer to God when you're just...
Yeah, that is a true reversal. I mean, I love being with people, as you know, and I love the people in our church. I don't love all of them, but I mean,
I'm sure they don't all love you,
no, sure
darling.
they don't. But, I mean, I don't know. I'm of the community, and that's great. But yeah, it is reversed in the sense that I don't need to go anywhere to find God, actually, now.
Do you think that there's more possibility of a sort of childlike wonder about, you said about the simple things? I mean, we've got this bird thing just outside our window, haven't we? And, you know, with...
You say a bird thing.
Well, I'm trying to think what you call it.
Bird feeder.
The bird feeder thing. Yeah. And one of our greatest joys is watching blue tits and long-tail tits and various things coming down to feed seeds that we put out for them. It's It's and it's, to me, that is so extraordinary and beautiful and wonderful.
I feel ridiculously flattered when a robin appears.
Oh, wow.
And I want to go out and say to it, can I just say I'm the one who put, or, you know, we're the people who actually provided this food for you. But no, I absolutely love it, yeah. I'm also thinking about people, anyone who knows me knows I'm a Father Brown fanatic. I love G.K. Chesterton and everything he wrote. But there's a moment in one of the stories where Father Brown says, someone says, how did you know about the truth or otherwise of something? And he said, I now believe in miracles fairly easily because I don't understand them. I don't know what they are, but I need faith for miracles. And therefore I can say I have a portion of faith to believe the miracle. What I can't believe in is things that are not probable.
You're going to have to expand on that.
Well, he gives an example. He says, if you tell me that Mary had a virgin birth, that was Jesus, you know, I'll work with that and go along with that. Now, if someone said to me, when Gladstone first met Queen Victoria, he put a cigar in her mouth, lit it, patted her on the back, and said, right, let's get going, whatever, I will say, I don't think that's happened. I will say that is so improbable that I'm not going to believe it.
Okay.
And one of the tasks, as I've tried to say just now, as you move, as common sense begins to overtake credulity, that you are free to say, just a minute. One or two of the things that have become almost part of what I have felt I have to believe and say, I can't hold them anymore. I can't cope with them in the same way. And but the good thing, if you like, or the encouraging thing is that I think what I would be hoping for is that relationship trumps bewilderment. In other words, this thing about relationship with Jesus, God, is the ultimate place to land. For me, I'm going to talk for me. And
well, I mean, that's interesting, isn't it? Because I think there is a sense sometimes that that's just the beginning, and the real stuff happens after that.
That's a very
the
good
Gospels
point.
are lovely, and they're great stories, and which they are amazing. But you know, the real issues, and I think that's where we can get lost. So there's almost a feeling, well, is it all right to keep going back to Jesus, to check on it? But of course it's essential, because that's where the relationship is. We don't have a relationship with Christianity, do we? I mean,
I don't know. I can't speak for anybody else. Well, we sort of do, but I don't really want a relationship with Christianity.
Well, we've joined that tribe. I mean, so obviously
we're in the tribe. But if that's all it is, and I know it's the body of Christ, the church, but I just think there are good reasons to do a bit of clearing up. You know that Welsh phrase I couldn't say properly. You know, keeping house in a cloud of witnesses.
Yeah.
You do a bit of spring cleaning occasionally and say, I don't actually believe that, or I don't go along with that, and I'm going to work with that and see where that takes.
So that's not the same as just chucking it out. It's the same as saying, you know what, I've just simply accepted this without thinking about it, and now I'm really gonna look at it.
It's a freedom.
It is a freedom.
And when I started writing, as you know, I had no mission at all. There was no thought of doing anything for God. That wasn't the reason for doing it. But what I was doing was being the little boy who saw the emperor riding through the town with no clothes on, and pointing and saying, to the horror of some people and the joy of others, but he's not wearing anything. Why are you all saying how wonderful he's dressed? And I think
we've still got to keep on, all of us, not us.
Yeah.
Everybody has to keep on looking and thinking, is this actually real? Is this really the truth? And I don't know, I know you have a bit of a problem with some of the things that we sing, but some of them are very extreme, really, aren't they? I mean, there's a beautiful song with a beautiful tune that's so lovely to sing, I Surrender All. Do we?
No.
Do I?
No.
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 Of course we don't really. That doesn't mean so we wouldn't like, sorry.
No, sorry, no, I agree entirely with you. The problem I have with that is that in a church congregation of 100 or 80 or something, you've got each person in a different place, either feeling, I'm doing all right with that, or I'm not. It seems incredible to me that we don't credit God with the ability to be warm and helpful and gradual with his assisting people in
especially as we have the Lord's Prayer. We have the bit before the Lord's Prayer in which Jesus says, go into your room, close the door and talk to your Father, and your Father who knows what's done in secret, he knows you. And we say this, we look to the Psalm, he knitted us together in our mother's womb. We say these things, so he knows jolly well that we can't surrender all. And I was talking to somebody, actually, Adrian, just this morning, and I was asking her how her week had been, and she said, I've survived this week. And I thought, now that would make a great Christian song to the same tune, you know. I survived this week.
I've survived it all.
Because
this
for
week.
many of us, it's tough, and that's the way it feels. And to be able to say that without adding anything to it ought to be okay, because we're brothers and sisters and family, and you know, that would be my hope,
it's okay.
Really.
And to take shortcuts, it really is a waste of time.
It's
not, doesn't make life easier. In fact, it actually makes life, I mean, it adds work, because if we're truly going to care for people and love them, we know we've known people who, because of damaged lives, never recovered, and understand that, and others who have made progress and things have changed, and thank God for that.
Well, I know we've talked about it before, a fear of taking things apart. You talked about it when you were very young. You had this idea of all of you going into church and all being asked to open your black bags. Was there going to be anything there? And that was when you first started writing. Of course, Shadow Doctor, you took that idea, didn't you? You took the idea of the fear of taking something to pieces. And the Shadow Doctor uses the image of the onion, and, you know, says that if you take this onion to pieces, there will be no heart, there will be no centre. And that's a great fear for many of us, isn't it? About how if we honestly look at things and say, well, I can't handle this anymore, and I can't believe this in my heart, there might be nothing left. And what the Shadow Doctor, in other words, what you came up with, but it's really important, is that if the onion doesn't add flavour to the stew, it's not an onion. And the flavour of Jesus. So it's not a silly thing to come back.
It's absolutely
you know,
right.
to say, does this have the flavour of Jesus? Now, obviously, we've talked before about how he didn't always do things in the same way. So we're not talking about a mechanical thing. We're talking about something far more than that.
No, I think that really sums it up. The amount of care required to deal as responsible representatives of God is pretty huge.
It is.
And we know.
It really is. Well, we'd love to hear from you anything that has triggered off, really. Interesting. Your reverses in your life, or the things you've suddenly realised that perhaps you wanted to change, or how you've surprised yourself by
coming to new conclusions. Anyway, we must go. Goodness me. We'll see you next week.